I'm here with Anthony Kjenstad, and he is the president and founder of Athletic Recovery and Performance. And we're specifically going to be talking about Firefly today. Anthony, welcome, and we tell the viewers or listeners a little bit about, where you are, kind of your background, and what you're kind of doing with the product.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, one. I appreciate it. So my name is Anthony Kjenstad. I am the president of a distribution company called Athletic Recovery and Performance. We really focus on one product. It's called the Firefly. My background is medical device, actually. I have built and been in the orthopedic industry for the last 22 years. Firefly is actually the side hustle of a medical device that I found about 4 years ago that was developed to prevent blood clots and reduce swelling in the orthopedic space. And it ended up having an application in the training room for a couple of things, but mostly focusing on recovery. So that's kind of had me straddle both sides of the medical business and now in this sports performance world.
I love it. Okay, so what exactly, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit in the medical space, right? But what exactly is Firefly in the athletic space? What does that even mean? What can you do with the product?
Sure. So again, it's probably easiest to go backwards in the medical side. So in the medical world, one of the common issues with post-operative care is blood clots. And a big thing is to keep your patients ambulatory, keep them moving, so they don't get a blood clot. There's products out in the medical market that are used to prevent blood clots. Typically, they're called SCDs, IPCs, sequential compression devices. And patients post-operatively have to be plugged into a wall, plugged into pumps when they're non-ambulatory in their patient beds, etc. The company I represent out of Europe actually saw an unmet need. These patients weren't wearing sequential compression as actively as they should. The nurses were getting frustrated with taking them off and on. So what they actually figured out is instead of squeezing the lower extremity to increase blood flow and prevent blood clots, they could actually stimulate a nerve in the body. So the Gecko is the medical version of the Firefly, and it actually is a nerve stimulation device that stimulates the perineal nerve in the lower extremity, which increases arterial and venous return 32% better than sequential compression. So that's where our foundation is on the medical side. What happened 2-3 years down the line with the product is the physios and ATCs and sports scientists in the training rooms who were already using sequential compression devices for performance recovery saw the benefits of our device because of the blood movement we were doing, and secondary to that, the portability, the kind of ease of use of our technology in places where they couldn't use the other technologies they were currently using.
Okay, so this sounds pretty interesting. Have there been like clinical studies or any trials or anything like that?
So yeah, as becoming a medical device, you have to go through a ton of clinical trials. You have to be approved by the FDA. So you actually have to prove that you do what you say you're going to do.
Okay.
In that world, so the Gecko and the Firefly are both run by what's called the on-pulse technology. That's their proprietary, I guess, secret sauce. And that secret sauce, the on-pulse technology, has proven they have proven to the FDA that they prevent blood clots.
Okay.
They also are FDA approved now for edema reduction. So very effective on swelling, edema reduction post-operatively, and in Q3 or 4 of this year, they'll have an application for wound care. They're actually showing that they're healing wounds 8 times faster. So yeah, on the medical side, ton and piles of clinical research. On the performance side, as you probably know, a lot of things that move from medical to performance don't always have to have that same science. So when I get asked that question by trainers, sports scientists, people like yourself, I really say, look, on the medical side, we've proved we move blood, we do these things. On the performance recovery side, we've done 6 or 7 good clinical studies that show a reduction in recovery times in combination with other recovery techniques. We know nutrition is huge. We know sleep is huge. So I wouldn't say Firefly on its own reduces recovery times, but what I would say is blood flow is good, and in combination with sleep and nutrition, you can have some real positive advances with recovery.
Okay. So what kind of benefits does Firefly have over something like, electrical stimulation where you kind of just plug in it, whatever muscle group you kind of want?
Yep. Good question. And that's probably the Achilles heel of our product. We look like one thing. We actually kind of, I would say, compete with another thing. So when you look at our technology right out of the gate, if I sent it to you in the mail as an athletic trainer or a sports scientist, you would open it up and go, oh, this is a stimulation device. It's in the category of Compex, Mark Pro, TENS, neuromuscular stimulation. We actually use that foundationally as our base technology. But again, on the medical world, we compete with sequential compression to increase arterial and venous return, to increase microcirculation.
Yeah.
So we are a nerve stim product. We're stimulating the nervous system. We're the only technology that I'm aware of, at least with our FDA approval, specific to nerves. So we act more like sequential compression. We look more like muscle stimulation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so with that, right, is the peroneal nerve the only group that you can kind of use this product with, or can you use it with, other nerve groups? Or
Sure. Good question. Which is, I get that a lot in baseball, actually. They want to put it everywhere other than what I tell them, where I tell them to put it. So if you look at our science and where foundationally we started, it was to prevent blood clots. 20% of your blood is in your lower extremities when you're standing. We were using the peroneal nerve to fire the muscle groups to basically push blood back to the heart faster. So you're trying to get it from the lower extremity back to the heart. And that's why we're a lower extremity specific product. That's why we focused on the peroneal nerve. There are other nerves on the body that are peripheral enough to stimulate externally. There's only a few that I'm aware of. And again, I'm not a clinical scientist, but the radial nerve and the ulnar nerve are another place where a lot of trainers are starting to see value from our product, but on our side, the company side, we have no clinical research on that. We're not looking at that. But there has been a lot of feedback positively in the throwing community, baseball predominantly, catchers and pitchers, where they're actually using this technology to stimulate the radial and ulnar nerve peripherally, and they feel like they're getting this microcirculatory effect that we have on the lower extremity, and they feel like their athletes are getting back faster, throwing with less pain, etc. But we're really not researching that right now. But outside of those two nerves, I'm not aware of any other nerve that's peripheral enough to stimulate with our technology.
Okay. So you mentioned baseball, and I think you mentioned a couple other sports, right? But what kind of groups are actively kind of using some of this stuff?
Yeah, so it's been my journey my background is medical device. So I know how to sell to hospitals, surgery centers, orthopedic surgeons really well. Getting into this training room community, I had already straddled it because I was coming from the orthopedic bracing durable medical equipment world. And so it's been a 3-year journey. I have about half to 3/4 of all the pro teams using Firefly. Some really are using it as a big part of what they do in the training room. Some are using it specific to injuries, etc. I would say I'm probably most heavily penetrated in the Major League Baseball when it comes to pro teams, and then NFL and NBA. And then as far as collegiate space, we're in about 60 Division I NCAA schools. We've really focused on Division I, obviously, because of budgetary constraints, etc. But we're also pretty big in the military. Navy SEALs, PJs, these elite warriors that are really high-end elite athletes. So that we've had a lot of traction in that space, specifically because we're easy to throw in a backpack and go out in the field with those type of athletes. So that's kind of where we've spent our focus the last 3 years, and really focused on penetrating.
Okay, so we talked about recovery measures, right? And I guess this is technically recovery, but how can this be used in kind of like a preventative space, right? So I guess my thought process goes to like planes and like compression pants and things like that. Can this be used in a similar conjunction with that?
Yeah, so I think, I feel like our training rooms that I'm working with are using us three ways.
Mm-hmm.
Recovery.
Yeah.
We know blood flow is a good part of foundationally recovery. So our science points to 2 to 4 hours of wear for recovery specifically.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the pro teams, as you know, are traveling. I mean, the
Yeah.
Lakers will play tonight, let's say, and then they'll jump on a plane, and immediately after the game, they'll fly to New York on a 5-hour flight. A lot of teams are using the Firefly for travel.
Mm.
We're moving about 62% of the blood that you get from ambulation. So that's been a huge application for the technology. And then lastly, because on the medical side, we are FDA approved for edema reduction,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of trainers are reporting back to us very good results with itises, ankle sprains, strains, anything where blood flow is a good thing
Mm-hmm.
for an extended period of time, and they want to continue that treatment outside of the training room. So I think those are the three buckets
Okay.
that I've seen us be effective. As far as, I think if you're a recovered athlete, you're going to have less injuries, etc.
Mm-hmm.
If you're spending more time on recovery, but I don't have any clinical science, or
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen any clinical
Mm-hmm.
science where, that's, I think, the nebulous cloud of recovery.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about it, but nobody specifically has an algorithm or proof that a better recovered athlete is less prone to injury, but it just makes sense that
Yeah.
that would happen, right?
Yeah. 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 No, I hear you. Okay. And so, you talked about this 2 to 4 hour time window. Where does that come from? And can it be worn longer or shorter?
Sure. So we did a 40-patient study with rugby athletes in the UK,
Oh, okay.
and they found that optimal wear
Uh-huh.
based on load for Firefly, again in combination with good nutrition and sleep, that 4 hours was kind of the optimal wear time for a blood flow device.
Okay.
So that's kind of where that number comes from. I would say I interact with athletes on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
and I always give them guidance of, depending on your load, you kind of want to be in the sweet spot of between 2 to 4 hours when you're specifically talking about recovery.
Okay.
When you're talking about edema, itises, etc., more is better.
Yeah.
And there's no limitation. We're not like a traditional muscle stem where you would get muscle fatigue with extended wear,
Mm-hmm.
because we're focused on the nervous system. There's you could wear this 30 hours in a row if you wanted to. I wouldn't suggest that unless you're specifically focused on like an ankle sprain or
Yeah.
hamstring strain or something where you wanted to focus, and then you might only focus the technology on one limb.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with recovery, you're going to wear it bilaterally.
Okay. And I think, we talked prior to this, and I think one of the most interesting things I found, right, we talked about edema and how it can reduce that is, like you said, with the ankle sprains, right? I think that's a very common, it can be more intense or more extreme, but it's a very common injury most times to a little degree, but it still affects the athlete in training. And I think that's a huge application, right? You just throw it on after, something like that, and that can greatly reduce the recovery time.
Yeah, and I've been challenged with that. Is that a good thing? So it's interesting. So the feedback we've gotten in that community with athletic trainers, specifically in the NBA, has been really getting the athletes back a lot quicker, sometimes 2-3 days quicker, with quick application of the Firefly on the affected injury and wearing it as much as possible. And the feedback's been great. I even have a lot of training rooms now that are going away from, I think the old school method, or I can't even comment on it because I'm not a trainer. So when I say old school, I just think old school. But
Yeah.
even in the community of orthopedics, less people are using ice and TENS and NMES and throwing the kitchen sink at these injuries. A lot of them are specifically focusing on one thing to see if it's working effectively. And that's where I've had my most successes with ankle sprains and lower extremity edema and itises, is getting the trainer to focus on just using the Firefly for a 3, 4, 5 day treatment
Yeah.
and finding out what the outcome is, so they can specifically say the Firefly directly affected that, and not really throwing the kitchen sink at it and then wondering what worked.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a I think a good protocol, right? Because again, the same thing goes in training, right? If we throw a bunch of things, we don't know necessarily what was most effective. We know something worked, but we don't know what it was, so it's hard to tease out. So I think that's a a good application where the rubber meets the road.
And but if it's a big name player on your team,
Yeah,
you want him back quicker. I can see where the trainer would hesitate and say, well, I don't also want to put myself on the line if it's not effective solely by itself, then I'm going to be accused of not throwing the kitchen sink at it. So it's really I think this balancing act, and that's what I'm learning as I'm investing myself more in this community, is trying to figure out, are the claims we are making for Firefly, are the things that I'm getting feedback from my athletes, does it translate to every other athlete? And where I've seen it most is really on these one-on-one recently with the track and field community, where I can have a little more personal relationship, and I feel like I'm almost part of their team when we're speaking to using the Firefly in conjunction with their training for recovery, and maybe adding a blood flow component to their itises. They're seeing a positive. So I don't make any clinical claims like I make an itis go away. But what I do say is, use me for recovery. You'll probably find that your itis has a positive effect from it as well. And it's typically the feedback I'm getting from my CrossFit community, my marathon community, my triathlete community.
Yeah. Okay. Is there, I guess, what is the direction that Firefly kind of hopes to go, right?
We're a medical device. So although we do a lot of cool things and almost too many things for how basic it is, it's still a medical device. It's still in the medical component, which it means it's disposable. And it really wasn't developed to be taken off and on multiple times and worn multiple times. So our goal in the next 12 to 16 months is to have a reusable device, pod-based device that you charge up the pods, and then it will connect to an electrode that's disposable. So it's a little more, I guess, user-friendly, environmentally friendly. And if an athlete makes an investment on it, they're not throwing out a $35, $40 device every week and a half. They actually have, so they'll make, I think it'll allow the community, in the triathlete marathon community, allow to invest in the technology a little better.
Yeah.
That's really, I think, the Achilles heel of the product right now, is it's still in its medical version. So we hope in that next 12 months we'll have a better vehicle for the product.
Yeah. No, awesome. Okay. Well, Anthony, I mean, this has been fantastic, right? I think the device I think it's a great device. I've used it personally, and I've seen some of its effects. And, again, the accessibility, the ability to be able to travel with it, I think that's all huge stuff, especially for the, busy athlete lifestyle. Recovery is probably one of the biggest things. And so aside from sleep and nutrition, like you said, and so with this, I think it just provides a great resource. And you really don't have to do that much, right? You kind of stick it on, and you can kind of lay down whatever you need to do or move around. I think it works in multiple ways. So, I think it's fantastic. Once again, thank you for your time, and looking forward to connecting again soon in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate always hearing myself talk about me and my product. So, thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.